Dead America, Tales from Las Vegas, The Grim Task by Derek Slayton. Chapter 1. The top floor office gave Captain Foster a clear view of everything happening below. He sat on the edge of a desk beside the window, coffee cup in hand, watching the base come alive in the early morning light. The scene was different from what it had been over the past few weeks. Back then, the mornings had carried a different kind of weight. The party buses would be staged and waiting, engines idling, and the soldiers and civilians who rode them out knew exactly what they were signing up for. Drive into the city, make noise, draw the creatures out of the neighborhoods and toward the perimeter, then get back before things went sideways. It was a grind, and it had cost them, but it had worked. This morning felt like a different animal entirely. The buses were quiet. In their place, dozens of small teams moved across the base in every direction, checking gear, pulling maps, loading supplies into a variety of vehicles. The operation had shifted, and with that shift had come a change in the air that Foster was still trying to put a name to. It wasn't dread exactly, and it wasn't excitement. It sat somewhere in between. He took another sip of his coffee and let himself hold the moment. The pale desert sky stretched out beyond the fence line, the sun still low enough that the base was mostly in shadow. These quiet stretches had become something he looked forward to. A few minutes to think without someone needing an answer from him. They never lasted long, but they were worth having. A knock came at the door. "Morning, Cap," Sergeant Hansen said. "Morning, Hansen." Foster turned from the window. "How are we looking out there?" "Conference room is set up. Our team is already in there, and Parker is getting everybody on the line," Hansen said. Foster looked back out the window for a moment. "Have you walked around the base this morning?" "Took the long route in," Hansen said. "What's the mood like?" Hansen paused, choosing his words. "If I'm being honest, it's a mixed bag. I get the sense people are excited to get out of here for a bit, but they're also afraid of what they're going to find." "That's understandable," Foster said. "I'm not exactly looking forward to it myself." He set the cup down on the desk and pushed himself to his feet. Hansen stepped aside as Foster crossed the room to join him at the door. "What do you say, Sarge? Want to get this show on the road?" "After you, Cap," Hansen said. The two of them walked down the hallway and descended the stairs to the first floor. The back conference room had been set up in advance. A long table dominated the space, a speakerphone unit sitting in the center of it. Private Thomas and Carver had claimed seats on one side, both stretching out with the loose ease of men who had already been at it for a while. Private Parker stood at the head of the table, hunched over the speakerphone, pressing buttons and muttering curses to himself as he glanced at the list of numbers in his hand. "How are we looking, Parker?" Foster asked. Parker hit two more buttons and then slowly raised both hands away from the device, his expression somewhere between cautious and hopeful. "I think we're good, Cap. Only one way to find out, though," Parker said. He leaned back down and pressed one final button. "Captain Brooks, can you hear me?" Parker asked. A beat of silence, then a clear voice came through the speaker. "I hear you loud and clear, Parker," Captain Brooks said. Parker let out a breath and motioned toward Foster. "Floor is yours, Cap," Parker said. Foster moved to the head of the table and leaned toward the speaker, pitching his voice to carry. Several voices were already present on the line, overlapping in a low tangle. "All right, everybody, let's get settled in," Foster said. The voices dropped off one by one until the line fell quiet. "First off, I'd like to thank Captain Brooks for joining us on the call today. For those who don't know, he's in charge of the stadium in the south of the city. They are locked up tight in there, but I wanted him on the call and in the loop," Foster said. A handful of voices on the line offered greetings. Brooks responded simply, "Good to be here. I am happy to report that the party bus operation has been more successful than we could have dreamed," Foster continued. "The last few weeks have been chaotic to say the least, but they have paid off. Our pilot Melvin flew me over the city last night, and the streets look remarkably clear." "How clear are we talking, Captain?" a voice on the line asked. "About 90%, Foster said. "There are stragglers roaming around the streets, but the packs I spotted from the air didn't appear to be that big. The largest one I saw was only around 50. He paused, giving the group time to sit with that. "I've already sent teams out to handle the packs I identified. Melvin is going to be in the air shortly, giving us real-time information. "Mike, are you on the line?" Foster asked. "I'm here, Captain," Midnight Mike said, "and I have the traffic cameras pulled up already." "Thank you, Mike. Did your new employees arrive yet?" Foster asked. Mike let out a short laugh. "My new interns, you mean?" "Yes, they are here and monitoring the phones. Everybody should have the studio number in their packets, and we're going to be running communications today. We will be calling teams direct, but we'll also be providing broad strokes over the air, so make sure you're tuned into the show," Mike said. "Thanks, Mike," Foster said. "Now, on to the business of the day. With the streets mostly clear, it's time to do something I know I've been dreading, which is going house to house, building to building to clear them out. We all hope that we're going to come across survivors, but the reality is we're going to come across a lot of grim scenes today." The line stayed quiet for a long moment. "To be clear, this is not a one-day operation. It's going to take weeks, if not months, to fully rid the city of the dead," Foster said. "Forgive the interruption, Foster, but I have a question," Brooks said. "Have at it, Captain," Foster said. "If these things are locked up tight inside, why are you spending resources on them instead of securing the city?" Brooks asked. "Excellent question," Foster said. "For starters, we have roughly half of the teams focused on building the perimeter. The initial plan is to use cars to fully surround the city, then go back and reinforce it at a later date. Obviously, that's going to take time, which is why we're focusing on the major roads first, then building out from there." "I still don't understand why that isn't the full focus of the operation," Brooks said. Mike cut in before Foster could respond. "Given that you haven't lifted a damn finger this entire time, I don't know why you're questioning things," Mike said. The line went quiet and uneasy. Foster let it sit for a moment before stepping in. "Captain Brooks has his orders, which is to keep those VIPs safely locked up in the stadium, but he is an ally," Foster said. Mike grumbled something under his breath. "Yeah, whatever, that's fine," he said. "To answer your question, Brooks, we're devoting teams to clearing out buildings because there's still a chance people could have survived, and the longer we wait, the less likely it is that they're going to make it," Foster said. "I understand," Brooks said. "Thank you for the answer. And Mike?" "Yeah, Brooks," Mike said. "I wish I could have done more, and honestly, I probably should have. But consider me on board," Brooks said. "If you need help coordinating things, my communications team is at your disposal." Mike paused before responding. "Thank you, Captain. Let's link up after this call," he said. Foster looked around the room. Thomas and Carver had their eyes on him. Parker stood with his arms crossed, ready to move. "All right," Foster said. "Now that we're all one big happy family again, let's get out there and get this done." Chapter 2. The neighborhood in the north of the city had the kind of quiet that still caught Foster's people off guard, even weeks into the operation. No traffic, no distant music from a television, no dogs barking. Just the dry desert air and the sound of their own boots moving across a sun-bleached front yard. Sergeant Hanson led the way across the dead grass, a spear held loosely at his side. Behind him, Private Parker and Private Thomas followed, each carrying a baseball bat. Parker had an additional piece of kit slung over one arm, a large section of plastic cut from the side of a rolling trash bin. 2 leather straps had been bolted to the back of it, turning it into a crude but functional shield. It had already saved him from a close call on the previous block, and he had no intention of giving it up. Thomas glanced back down the street. A civilian trio was just emerging from a house 2 doors behind them, carrying the same basic loadout. One of them caught his eye and raised a thumbs up. Thomas returned it and turned back around. Further down, at the intersection half a block away, another team of 3 had taken up position. They weren't clearing houses. Their job was to stand watch, keeping an eye on the surrounding streets for any straggler creatures that might wander in and complicate things. "How many houses are in Vegas anyway?" Thomas asked. "Couple 100,000, Hanson said. "Give or take." Thomas worked through that for a moment. "So, let's see. Given how many of us are out here clearing these houses, it should only take about 3.5 years to clear the city. Don't forget the hotels, the office buildings, the supercenters," Parker added. He kept his tone light, but Thomas still let out a long, defeated sigh. "So, sometime in the next century then?" Thomas said. "It's not going to be that bad, Thomas," Hanson said. Mike has a long list of survivors for us to get to. Every time we save one of them, we get more hands to help clear the city." "We've already cleared the streets, at least for the most part," Thomas said. "Why aren't they coming out to help now?" "Because the captain didn't want to run the risk of them getting eaten by a straggler," Parker said. "The last thing we want is one of those fast ones chasing after a civilian." "Don't worry, though," Hansen said. "Foster has a few teams focused on getting to those people." Thomas shook his head and said nothing more as they approached the front door of the next house on the block. He stepped up to the window beside the door, cupping his hands around his eyes to cut the glare and peer inside. He held the position for a moment before straightening up and turning back to the others. "Looks like we got a couple more customers," Thomas said. "I guess that's my cue then," Parker said. He moved up to the front door and took a knee, positioning the plastic shield in front of him. Hansen stepped around to his side and pulled a small tool from his belt, working the lock until it gave with a solid thunk. He reached over and patted Parker on the shoulder. "You ready, Parker?" Hansen asked. "Yeah, I got a few more in me," Parker said. He shifted his weight slightly, settling into the position. "But one of you is going to have to swap with me on the next block." Hansen looked over to Thomas. The two of them held eye contact for a long beat before simultaneously extending their arms. They counted down from 3 with a nod of their heads and shot out their hands. Thomas had his fist balled up. Hansen's hand came down flat over it. "Paper beats rock," Hansen said. "Damn it," Thomas said. "After we clear these two out, remind me to check the medicine cabinet for ibuprofen." Parker let out a deliberate sigh that got both their attention. He was still crouched on the ground, shoulder braced behind the shield, waiting. "If you two are done playing kids' games, can we get on with it?" Parker asked. Hansen and Thomas both let out a short laugh as the sergeant reached over, grabbed the doorknob, and pushed it open. The door swung back and smacked against the interior wall. The sound carried inside, and within a few seconds the shuffling began. 2 creatures worked their way toward the opening. Parker rose just enough to press forward, pushing past the threshold and wedging the rigid plastic into the door frame. He put his weight behind it as the first ghoul reached the barrier, its upper body pressing against the top edge of the shield, arms clawing at the air above it. The thing thrashed and swiped, agitated by the sight and smell of what it couldn't reach. Hansen stepped in close beside Parker, lined up his angle, and drove the spear forward through the creature's eye socket. It dropped immediately, the tension against the shield releasing all at once. "It's down," Hansen said. Parker shoved the shield forward, pushing the body back into the living room before resetting his stance. The second ghoul came forward the same way the first had, reaching up over the top of the shield. It got the same result. The spear found its mark and the creature crumpled. Parker held his position, and the 3 of them went still, listening. The house gave nothing back. No shuffling, no impact against walls, no sound at all beyond the wind outside. After a stretch of quiet that felt long enough, Parker stood up. He stretched his back, then bent down to rub his knee that had been grinding against the concrete. "Hey, Sarge, would you mind holding this for a minute?" Parker asked. "My knee is yelling at me and I need to walk it off." "Yeah, go do the walkthrough," Hansen said. "We'll keep an eye on things out here." Parker nodded and handed the shield over. He readied his bat and stepped inside, glancing down at the 2 bodies in the entryway to the living room. A middle-aged couple. The man had several bites on his arms and neck, his shirt torn in multiple places. The woman showed no bite marks. The only signs of trauma on her were the dried blood around her mouth and the damage on her hands, the knuckles split and raw from where she had apparently been striking something. Parker didn't linger on it. He had seen the story too many times. He moved through to the kitchen and stopped. Several of the cabinets were standing open. The shelves had been cleared, the contents gone. Not ransacked, not scattered. Just gone, like someone had methodically emptied them. Parker walked slowly along the counter, checking each open cabinet in turn, trying to work out what he was looking at. He stepped to the side door and pulled back the curtain. The car was still in the driveway. "Something is not adding up here," Parker said. He turned and moved toward the far end of the house, down the hallway that led to the bedrooms. There was a door on each side of the hall, both of them standing wide open. At the end of the hall was a third door, and that one was shut tight. Parker looked at it for a moment. Then his eyes moved to the wall beside him. Framed photos lined the hall, a timeline of the couple from the living room, vacations, holidays, birthdays, casual evenings in the backyard. In most of them, a little girl appeared, blonde hair, bright eyes, maybe 7 or 8 years old. She was in nearly every frame. Parker stopped at the last photo. The family dressed up nicely, sitting together in a park on a sunny day. The girl's hair caught the light like spun gold. She was laughing at something off camera. He looked back down the hall at the closed door. His eyes dropped to the lower half of it and found what he had missed the first time. Bloody strike marks, clustered at the bottom of the door where something had been hitting it repeatedly. "Hanson, get in here!" Parker called out. His voice was sharp enough that both soldiers came through the front door at a jog. "You okay, Parker?" Hanson asked. "We need to get into that bedroom," Parker said. "What is it?" Thomas asked. Parker nodded toward the photos on the wall. Both men looked, scanning the frames until they found the girl. Thomas went quiet. "Christ," Thomas said. Hanson handed Parker the shield without a word. Parker got it into position and tried the knob. It turned freely. But when he pushed, the door barely moved. Something heavy braced against the other side. "Give me a hand," Parker said. Hanson and Thomas pressed in behind him. The three of them leaned into it together, the door grinding slowly inward, dragging a large dresser across the floor a few inches at a time. They worked it open just enough for Parker to angle his head inside and look. In the far corner of the room, sitting on the bed with her knees pulled up to her chest, was the little girl from the photos. Empty food packaging lay scattered around her, wrappers and crushed containers covering most of the mattress and floor. She stared back at Parker with wide, frightened eyes, her whole body gone rigid at the sight of him. Parker lowered his voice as far as it would go. "It's okay," he said. "We're here to help you." The girl's face broke apart and she began to cry. The sound of it filled the small room, as if all of the tension and fear that had built up over the last several weeks was being unleashed. Hanson reached down to his belt and unclipped the radio. "This is Hanson," he said into it. "I'm going to need a transport on my location. We have a survivor." Chapter 3. The south side of the city looked different from what it had been a few weeks ago. Not good, not anything close to normal, but different in a way that felt like progress. The wrecked cars had been pushed to the sides of the roads by the clearing crews, opening up lanes that could actually be driven. The bodies that had littered the intersections and sidewalks were gone, dealt with by teams that had been working long, difficult hours. What remained were the stragglers, lone creatures wandering the mostly empty streets with no particular purpose, too slow now to be much of a threat to anyone paying attention. Connor kept the SUV at a steady pace, giving a wide berth to one of them as he steered around it. The thing barely registered their presence, continuing its shuffle down the center of the road without turning its head. "Patrol team will get to them," Landry said from the back seat, watching the creature disappear in the side mirror. Connor nodded and kept driving. Diesel was occupying himself in the passenger seat by working through every vent on the dashboard one by one, angling each one directly at his face. He had been at it since they left the base, methodically adjusting the louvers until the airflow was exactly where he wanted it. Connor watched him out of the corner of his eye for a moment, then reached down to the climate controls and turned the air conditioning all the way up. The blast of cold air that hit Diesel's face produced a long, slow sigh that seemed to come from somewhere deep in the man's chest. He closed his eyes and let it wash over him. Connor glanced up at the rearview mirror. Landry was already looking back at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "Are you doing all right there, big fella?" Landry asked. Diesel opened his eyes, seeming to register that his behavior might look a little unusual. He made no move to adjust the vents or lower the fan speed. He just sat there, letting the cold air continue to hit him full in the face as he spoke. "Have either of you spent time in the tunnels?" Diesel asked. "Can't say I've ever had the pleasure," Landry said. "Well, let me tell you, they're not too bad in the winter. If you can get a few vents and doors open, you can even get a nice breeze going through them. The summer, however..." Diesel trailed off. He stared at the vent in front of him for a moment, somewhere else entirely. Then he came back. "In the summertime, even if you could get a breeze going, it was painful." "How so?" Connor asked. "Have you ever held a hairdryer up to your face?" Diesel asked. "Pretty sure I did that when I was a kid," Connor said. "Well, Imagine that instead of a small area of your face getting hot, it was your entire body, Diesel said. Actually, now that I think about it, running a hairdryer against some of those summer breezes might have cooled you off. Connor and Landry both made the same low sound at roughly the same time, something between a groan and a wince. At least those days are over, right? Landry said. How are you liking your new digs? Connor asked. Still getting used to sleeping in a real bed, but I'm managing, Diesel said. I am excited to try out the pool once it gets a little warmer. You'll have to try out the one at the Miller's old place, Landry said. They have a water slide. Diesel thought about that for a moment, a slow smile spreading across his face as the mental image took shape. He let out a short laugh. I never thought I'd get to live the good life, he started. He trailed off as Connor pulled the SUV to the curb and brought it to a stop. The apartment complex spread out in front of them, a large property that took up most of the block. 4 buildings occupied the corners of the complex, each one rising 3 stories, their exterior staircases and walkways connecting along the upper levels. In the center of the property, partially obscured by a wrought iron fence, was the pool area and the clubhouse building beyond it. From the road, they couldn't see much of what was happening inside the fence. What they could see were the windows. Several of them had hand-drawn signs pressed against the glass, the word "help" written in large letters on whatever the occupants had found to write on. Cardboard boxes broken down flat, bed sheets, notebook paper taped together. Between those windows, others told a different story entirely. Curtains torn away, figures visible in the dimness beyond the glass, the slow, aimless movement of creatures with nowhere to be. Before we can get to that, though, we have some work to do, Diesel said. The 3 of them climbed out of the SUV. The heat hit them immediately after the cold interior of the car, and Diesel paused for a moment with his hand still on the door before shaking it off. They reached back inside and pulled their weapons. Connor and Landry each took a bat, both of them also carrying sidearms holstered at their hips. Diesel pulled a large makeshift shield from the back, a section cut from the side of a heavy-duty rolling dumpster with 2 thick straps bolted to the rear, the same general design the soldiers at Nellis had been using in the field. So, where do you want to start? Landry asked. The answer came before anyone could offer one. From inside the building on their left, moaning began drifting out through a propped open door at ground level, followed shortly after by the rhythmic sound of something hitting a hard surface. Connor listened for a second, then shrugged and pointed. Seems as good a place as any, Connor said. They walked toward the propped door and stepped through into the interior hallway. The noise was closer now, more defined. Ahead of them, about 30 feet down the corridor, 3 creatures were pressed up against an apartment door, working at it with their hands, their bodies lurching forward in that slow, repetitive way that the older ghouls had settled into. Diesel raised his shield and started to move forward. A hand tapped him on the shoulder. I don't think that's necessary yet, Landry said. We got this, Connor said. Diesel stepped back and watched as Connor and Landry walked down the hall at a pace that was almost leisurely, like 2 men in no particular hurry. When they got to within 10 yards of the creatures, Connor lifted his bat and banged it hard against one of the closed apartment doors as he passed. The metal rang out down the hallway, sharp and loud, and all 3 ghouls turned away from the door they had been working at. The creatures started toward them. Connor and Landry split apart, each moving to their own side of the hall, and the approaching ghouls spread out with them. Connor stepped up into the first one and put it down with a single overhead swing. Landry handled the second the same way, quick and clean. The third was between them now, and Landry pivoted toward the center of the hall, swinging across his body and catching the creature across the side of the head. It dropped. The whole thing had taken about 15 seconds. Do you want to see if anybody is home? Landry asked. Connor nodded and walked up to the apartment door the creatures had been working at. He reached for the handle and then stopped, muttering something under his breath that neither of the other 2 could fully make out. What is it? Landry asked. Look at the locks, Connor said. Landry stepped up beside him. The lock mechanism on the door was electronic, a small panel with a keypad and a fob reader built in. No keyhole, no tumbler to pick. Well, so much for picking these things, Landry said. Can't you just kick it open? Diesel asked. It's reinforced, Connor said, shaking his head. We're going to need a fob if we're going to get inside. They all turned back toward the door as something clicked on the other side of it, a series of electronic beeps as the locks disengaged. Then the door swung inward. The man standing in the opening looked like he had been through a long stretch of very little sleep and even less good news. He was in his early 30s, but the bags under his eyes and the general dishevelment of his appearance added years to him. He stared at the three of them for a moment, as if he wasn't entirely sure they were real. "Oh, thank God," he said. "I never thought those things would ever stop making noise." "Jesus, man, are you okay?" Landry asked. The man rubbed his eyes and gave a tired, half-hearted nod. "Yeah, I'll be all right. The name's Kevin, by the way." "I'm Landry, this is Connor and Diesel," Landry said. "You want to come in?" Kevin asked. "I don't have much to offer except for tap water." "We're all right. We got a lot of work to get done," Connor said. "I don't suppose you have a key fob, do you?" Landry asked. Kevin blinked, then stepped back from the door and crossed to the far wall where a row of hooks held various keys and cards. He plucked one off, turned back around, and tossed it across the hallway. "Here you go," Kevin said. "Not sure what good that's going to do you, though." "We need to get into the clubhouse," Landry said. Kevin went still. He looked at them with an expression that sat somewhere between disbelief and something approaching concern. He said nothing for a moment, studying their faces. "I'm guessing you haven't been over there yet, have you?" Kevin said. The three of them exchanged a look and shook their heads. "Well, if you're out here helping people like me, I assume you can handle it," Kevin said. "But you might want to give it a good look before heading in." "We appreciate it, Kevin," Landry said. "If you don't mind, just hang tight here for another few hours," Connor said. "A team will be by for you." "Take your time," Kevin said. "I'm going to pass out now that I have some quiet." They nodded as Kevin retreated back into the apartment and the locks engaged behind him. The three of them stood in the hallway for a moment before moving off toward the far end of the corridor and the turnoff toward the interior of the complex. "What do you think he meant by 'we can handle it'?" Diesel asked. "You know how civilians are," Landry said. "Always blowing things out of proportion." "Yeah, I mean, it's just a clubhouse," Connor said. "How bad can it be?" They came around the corner and the fenced pool area opened up in front of them. The enclosure was substantial, taking up a wide stretch of the complex's center. Inside the wrought iron perimeter sat a large rectangular pool, the water gone a flat, murky color from weeks of no circulation. A covered grilling area occupied one side, the furniture around it overturned and scattered. And at the far end of the enclosure, the clubhouse building stood with its floor-to-ceiling windows facing the pool. The three of them walked up to the fence and looked through it. Inside those windows, pressed together in the dim interior of the clubhouse, dozens of creatures moved in slow, aimless circles. There was barely room for them to move, the space packed tightly enough that their shoulders bumped against one another as they shuffled. The sheer number of them made the building look like it was breathing, the mass of bodies swaying in a slow, collective rhythm against the glass. Connor stared at it for a long moment. "Well, I just had to ask, didn't I?" Chapter 4. The fence gave them a clear view of the problem without putting them in the middle of it, which was the only good thing about the situation. The three of them stood at the perimeter, studying the clubhouse and the mass of creatures packed inside it. Most of the ghouls hadn't noticed them yet, still milling in their slow, directionless way against the glass. But a pair of stragglers near the rear corner of the building had picked up on something. They turned away from the wall and began making their way across the concrete toward the fence, bumping shoulders as they shuffled forward. The trio watched them come without moving. The fence was between them and the creatures, and neither ghoul was moving fast enough to be any kind of immediate concern. Still, none of them looked away. "Are you sure that we need to get in there?" Diesel asked. "Those locks on the doors can't be picked, at least not with what we brought with us," Connor said. "If you can find me a sledgehammer, I can break in," Diesel said. "I'm sure you could, big fella, but it would take a lot of time that we don't have," Landry said. "Getting in there and getting the office manager's key fob is our best bet," Connor said. Diesel looked at the clubhouse, then back at the two of them. "Okay, I'm game, but how do you want to do it?" Before either of them could answer, one of the approaching zombies lurched sideways into the other. The impact was enough to knock the smaller of the two off balance, and it stumbled toward the pool. Its feet caught the lip of the edge, and it went over, hitting the water with a flat, graceless splash. It thrashed for a few seconds, arms churning, and then the deep end took it down. The water stilled. Landry watched it sink. "How big do you think that pool is?" "I'm not sure about the dimensions, but I'm pretty sure it could host one hell of a big pool party," Connor said. Landry looked at him. "So, what do you say we throw one?" Diesel glanced between the two of them, trying to work out what they had in mind. Neither man offered an explanation, both of them already turning toward the gate. Diesel looked back at the pool, then at the clubhouse full of creatures, then at their retreating backs. He fell in behind them without another word. Landry pushed through the gate first and walked toward the remaining straggler that was still making its way across the concrete. He brought the bat around in a clean, level swing and took it down without breaking stride. The body crumpled, and he kept walking. Connor went the other direction, moving toward the wall of floor-to-ceiling windows that ran along the near side of the clubhouse. The effect was immediate. The creatures inside caught sight of him and began crowding toward the glass, bodies pressing forward until the faces near the back were barely visible through the mass. The ones up front pushed their hands flat against the surface, mouths working, eyes vacant and fixed on him. Connor and Diesel stood in front of the window and took in the sight for a moment. Nearly every one of the ghouls inside showed signs of having been bitten multiple times. The clothing was shredded in places, dried blood covering most of what remained. They had been in there a long time. "I'd take zombies in the tunnels every time over being locked in there," Diesel said. "I can't imagine being trapped as everyone around you is being mauled." "I don't understand why they would come here," Connor said. Landry walked up, stopping beside them. "Maybe they thought there was safety in numbers, or they put too much stock in the fence." He paused, looking at the press of bodies against the glass. "At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter since they're in our way." Connor reached out and rapped his knuckles against the window. He did it twice, testing. The glass vibrated under his hand in a way that surprised him, a low flex that high-end construction had no business producing. He let out a short laugh. "What tickled your fancy?" Landry asked. "You gotta love these places," Connor said, "charging luxury prices for subpar building quality." "Well, it's hard to make money if you spend a lot of money," Landry said. Diesel leaned forward and gave the glass a knock of his own, his expression thoughtful. The tunnels may not have been the most luxurious of homes, but at least they were well built. The other two laughed at that. Connor waved them forward and they followed him around the edge of the pool to the far side. The three of them looked down into the water where the ghoul had gone under. It lay at the bottom, still moving in a slow, grasping way, reaching upward at nothing in particular. Connor studied it for a moment, then looked across the pool at the window they had been standing in front of. "So, what do you think, Landry? Put a few rounds into the glass, get their attention, and let them do the heavy lifting?" "If that window is as weak as you think it is, that should be enough," Landry said. Diesel raised his shield and held it out to his side, getting it into position. The other two looked at him. He shrugged. "Just in case some of them try to come around the side." Connor and Landry both nodded and drew their sidearms. They aimed at the far window, targeting the outer edges rather than the center. "Take the right side, I'll take the left," Connor said. Landry adjusted his aim. They fired within a second of each other, the shots punching into the edges of the glass. The sound rolled across the pool and off the surrounding buildings, and the creatures inside reacted instantly, the whole mass surging toward the damaged window. More bodies pressed against it, weight building against the weakened edges. The cracks appeared first as thin lines spreading from the impact points, branching outward in uneven patterns, the spider webbing growing second by second under the combined pressure of the bodies behind it. The trio watched from across the pool as the fractures multiplied and spread toward one another. Then the window gave way all at once, the entire panel dropping in large fragments that shattered against the concrete at the base of the building. The horde poured out through the opening without hesitation, stepping over the broken glass and onto the pool deck, locking onto the three figures standing on the opposite side of the water. They came in a steady stream, one after another, moving toward the pool with no awareness of what was in front of them. The first one reached the edge and walked straight over it, dropping into the water without slowing. The ones behind it followed the same path. They entered the pool in a continuous line, splashing down and sinking, the surface churning with the impact of body after body. The creatures already underwater provided a surface for the later ones to land on, and those toward the back of the pack ended up staying near the top, their feet finding the submerged bodies of their counterparts as a platform. The shallow end began to fill with creatures that had floated or drifted over, clawing at the walls and each other, trying to find purchase. In less than a minute, the clubhouse was mostly empty. The pool was not. "Diesel," Connor said, "make sure our friends enjoy their time in the pool. We'll get the key fob." Diesel was already moving toward the shallow end stairs before Connor finished the sentence. He planted himself at the top step, shield up, bat in his other hand. It only took a moment before the first creature pulled itself far enough out of the water to present a problem, its arms hooked over the edge of the pool as it tried to haul itself up the steps. Diesel let it get its elbows over the lip and then stepped back sharply, yanking the shield away. The ghoul lost its grip and dropped flat onto the concrete at the edge of the deck. Diesel brought the bat down hard on the back of its skull, ending it, and stepped back to the top of the stairs. Another was already making its way toward the shallow end, moving along the wall of the pool. He settled in and got to work. On the other side of the complex, Connor and Landry picked their way through the broken glass and stepped into the clubhouse through the empty window frame. What was inside stopped them both for a moment. The room had been a gathering space at some point, the kind of common area that apartment complexes use to justify the monthly fees. Long tables, padded chairs, a flat screen mounted on one wall, a kitchen counter along the back with bar stools lined up in front of it. All of it was knocked over and scattered now, the furniture shoved to the walls or upended entirely. The floors and every flat surface were covered in the old, dried blood. The smell had settled into everything. "Come on," Connor said. "The manager's office is over there." They crossed the room, stepping around the worst of it, and stopped at the office door. Through the interior window, they could see a single zombie on the floor inside, struggling in a slow, repetitive way. The thing had lost most of the flesh on its right leg, the damage severe enough that it could not stand. It wore the remains of a business suit, the jacket shredded and saturated with old blood, the tie still knotted at the collar. Landry used his bat to knock out the window, reached through and turned the handle, and pushed the door open. The two of them stepped inside. Connor walked past the desk to where the creature was still trying to drag itself upright and put it down with a single downward strike. He straightened up and looked around the office. Landry was already at the desk, pulling drawers open, sorting through the contents. He worked through 3 drawers before his hand closed around something solid. He pulled it out and held it up. A key ring with a single fob attached, a small paper label affixed to it in faded ink that read, "Master Fob." "Keys to the kingdom," Landry said. Connor let out a low laugh. "Now, we just need to check 500 apartments and we can call it a day." The look that crossed Landry's face moved from relief to something considerably darker in the space of about 2 seconds. He stared at the fob in his hand, then let out a long, slow breath and shook his head. "You're killing me, man," Landry said. Connor laughed again. "Sorry, Landry." Landry pocketed the fob and looked toward the door. Outside, the muffled sound of Diesel doing his job at the shallow end drifted in through the broken window. "Come on," Landry said. "Let's go see who we can save." Chapter 5. A mile north of the Strip, the streets had the kind of emptiness that still felt wrong even after weeks of it. The storefronts sat dark and shuttered, the road itself clear of the creatures that had once packed it shoulder to shoulder. A few cars sat abandoned at odd angles where their drivers had left them, doors hanging open, some with their windows fogged from the inside. The cleaning crews hadn't made it to this part of the city yet, but the streets themselves were passable, which was enough for now. Magnus, Aldrich, and Cade moved down the center of the road in no particular hurry. Aldrich and Cade had their shields strapped to their forearms, the metal glinting in the afternoon sun, swords sheathed at their sides. Magnus had his warhammer resting up on one shoulder, his free hand loose at his side. They walked the way men walk when they have seen the worst of something, and come out the other side still standing, easy in their bodies, unhurried, taking up as much of the road as they pleased. Magnus was the first to spot it, a lone creature shambling out from the recessed doorway of a dry cleaning shop, blundering forward into the open with the directionless, shoulder-first gait that the older ghouls had settled into. It hadn't seen them yet, wandering into the street without any particular destination in mind. "It's about time somebody wanted to make a run at me," Magnus said. He broke away from the other two without slowing his overall pace, just redirecting, the warhammer coming off his shoulder and into both hands as he closed the distance. The creature finally registered him when he was about 10 feet away and changed its course, arms lifting. Magnus didn't wait. He brought the hammer straight down, the full force of the swing driving it onto the top of the ghoul's skull. The impact was absolute. The creature dropped straight down, spine and skull giving way simultaneously, and hit the pavement in a heap. Magnus stepped over it and rejoined the others, who hadn't broken stride. They were looking across the street now. Magnus followed their gaze. A strip mall occupied the far side of the block, anchored at the center by a large supercenter. Half a dozen smaller businesses flanked it on either side, running the length of the complex. "It doesn't look like this place has been touched," Aldrich said. Cade gestured toward the parking lot in front of the complex. 24 cars sat spread across the spaces, right where their owners had left them. "Those cars tell a different story," he said. They adjusted course and walked toward it. As they got within 30 yards of the supercenter's entrance, the movement inside the front windows became readable. It wasn't survivors pressing up against the glass, trying to get the attention of anyone passing. The figures behind the doors were slow and purposeless, their hands dragging across the glass rather than pounding against it, their heads tilting side to side, with no awareness of what they were looking at. The creatures were trapped inside, working the doors and windows out of instinct rather than intent. The three of them watched for a moment. "Let's check the other businesses first," Magnus said. "This battle will be our reward." Aldrich and Cade looked at each other and clapped their shields together, the metal ringing out down the empty street. They fell in behind Magnus as he turned and walked toward the far right end of the complex, moving along the line of storefronts. The first few were dark inside, no movement visible, no sign that anything living or dead had been active in them for some time. A nail place with its chairs still in neat rows, a phone repair shop, a tax preparation office with paper still spread out across the front counter. They passed each one without stopping. Several of the others had creatures inside, visible through the glass in various states of aimless movement, drawn to the windows as the gladiators passed, but unable to do anything about it. Magnus noted each one and kept moving. They would get to them. At the far end of the building, the last storefront gave them pause. There was movement inside, but it wasn't near the front. The creatures weren't working the windows the way the others had been. Magnus stopped and stepped up close to the glass, cupping one hand around his eyes to cut the glare. It was a small restaurant, the kind of casual sit-down place that filled out the ends of strip malls. Inside, the tables were shoved out of their original positions, several overturned entirely, chairs scattered across the floor. There were dark stains on the tile that had long since dried, pooled near the overturned furniture and tracked in smeared lines across the room. Half a dozen creatures occupied the space, but all of them were at the rear of the restaurant, crowded against the door that led back into the kitchen. They were pressing at it steadily, working the surface with their hands, ignoring the front entirely. "That's curious," Aldrich said. "Shouldn't they be trying to get out at us?" "It looks like we might have something here, boys," Magnus said. He reached down and tried the door. Locked. He studied the frame for a moment, moving his eyes along the edge where the bolt met the strike plate, finding the weak point in the thin metal. He took a step back and lifted the warhammer off his shoulder. "I'll open it up," Magnus said. "You go in and handle your business." Aldrich and Cade both nodded. They drew their swords, holding them loose at their sides, and positioned themselves just off the door. Magnus swung the hammer at the locking mechanism with everything he had. The impact tore the bolt housing clean out of the frame, the thin metal buckling and splitting, the door springing inward from the force. The sound reached the creatures at the back of the restaurant before the door was fully open. They turned away from the kitchen door all at once and began moving toward the two gladiators pushing inside. Aldrich went left and Cade went right, the two of them splitting the room between them. The creature mob divided the same way, drawn to the nearest movement. Aldrich gave them a moment to close, timing it, and then swung his sword across his body in a wide, level arc. The blade was well maintained and sharp, the edge catching the lead ghoul across the neck with enough force to cut cleanly through. The creature's head stayed put for half a second before toppling off to the side. The body followed it down. Cade was more direct. He stepped into the first one that reached him and drove the point of his blade through its eye socket, withdrawing it in the same motion. The ghoul dropped without so much as a stumble. He was already turning to the next one. The two of them worked their respective sides of the room with ease, neither man showing urgency or panic, as if they were back at the Colosseum sparring rather than engaging in a life or death struggle. When a creature got too close, the shield came up and shoved it back into an open position. When the time was right, the sword found its mark. The battle moved quickly, the outcome never in question, and inside of 2 minutes, the floor held only bodies. "The battlefield is secure, Magnus," Aldrich said. Magnus walked in through the open door, looking the room over once before pointing at Cade. "Take position by the front door. It is unlikely there is anything out there that would cause us trouble, but I would rather not assume." Cade nodded and moved to the front of the restaurant, taking up a position where he could see both the street and the interior of the room. Magnus and Aldrich moved toward the back, stepping around the bodies and the overturned furniture. The kitchen door sat slightly ajar where the creatures had worked at it, and Magnus pushed on it. It moved barely 2 inches before stopping hard against something solid on the other side. He and Aldrich looked at each other, both of them reading the same thing in the resistance. Magnus raised his free hand and knocked on the door, 3 firm raps. "Is there anyone alive back there?" Magnus asked. The silence on the other side lasted long enough that Aldrich was about to say something. Then a voice came through, a woman's voice, filtered through the narrow gap at the door's edge. The relief in it was unmistakable, though something cautious ran underneath it. "Yes, we're here," she said. Is it safe to come out?" "You are safe," Magnus said. "We have cleared the threat, and we are prepared to take you someplace safe." He and Aldrich took several steps back from the door, giving it room. For a minute they could hear movement on the other side, the sound of heavy things being dragged and repositioned, the low voices of people talking to one another without raising them. A habit formed over weeks of keeping quiet. The barricade came apart piece by piece. Then the door swung open. 3 people stood in the kitchen doorway, blinking in the light of the restaurant. A woman in front, 2 men behind her. All 3 of them had dried blood on their clothing, their faces carrying the hollowed look of people who had been running on poor sleep and rationed food for longer than they should have had to. But they were standing, and their eyes were clear, and that put them ahead of a great many people. Each one of them stopped in the doorway when they got a proper look at who had come for them. The woman stared at Magnus and Aldrich for a long moment, her expression cycling through several things at once before settling somewhere between bewildered and cautiously grateful. She opened her mouth and then closed it again. I am so confused right now," she said. "My name is Magnus," he said. "These are my men Aldrich and Cade." He gestured back toward the front, where Cade lifted a hand without turning from the window. Aldrich gave a slight formal bow. "It's a pleasure to meet you, ma'am." She blinked at the trio. "I'm Beth," she said. "This is Keith and John." She glanced back at the 2 men behind her, who offered a series of small shrugs at one another in lieu of anything more useful. She turned back to Magnus. "I'm just going to ask, why are you dressed as gladiators?" "Because there is nobody to tell us that we cannot," Magnus said. Beth looked back at Keith and John again. Keith raised an eyebrow. John shrugged a second time. Beth nodded slowly. "You gotta love Las Vegas," she said. One of the men, John, stepped forward a half step. "Is it really safe out there?" he asked. "It is safe," Magnus said, "but we are making it safer." "Have you not heard on the radio what we are doing out there?" Aldrich asked. Beth shook her head. "We haven't. The 3 of us have been locked in that room for weeks." She trailed off for a moment, her expression going inward as she tried to work out the actual count of days. She let it go. "Or months, honestly, I don't know. Our phones died within a couple of days, and there isn't a television or radio back there. We have no idea what's been happening out here. The only thing we do know is that we're very tired of eating stale bread and canned soup." "We will be more than happy to take you someplace safe," Magnus said, "that will have a more robust dinner menu." All 3 of them nodded with the kind of enthusiasm that came from having thought about very little else for a long stretch of time. Magnus let the moment sit for just a beat before continuing. "However, we could use your help first." Chapter 6. The parking lot of the supercenter had become a construction site of sorts, and all 6 of them were working it hard. Magnus moved from car to car with his warhammer, breaking out the driver's side windows one by one. He had worked out the rhythm of it early on. One swing to the center of the glass, a quick check of the interior, then on to the next. Most of the vehicles were empty, their owners long gone. A few held the personal effects of people who had left in a hurry. Jackets and bags and coffee cups still sitting in the cup holders. One of them, a mid-sized sedan near the far end of the lot, held something more. Magnus swung the hammer and the window came apart, and before the glass had finished falling, he was already processing what he was looking at. A man, heavy-set, still buckled into the driver's seat, turned by the virus weeks ago and trapped there ever since. The creature lunged against the seatbelt at the sight and smell of him, the worn fabric holding it in place. Magnus dispatched it quickly and moved on to the next car without comment. Across the lot, the others were doing the harder part of the work. Getting the vehicles into position required pushing them by hand, which was slow going. Cade and John, one of the men rescued from the restaurant, had teamed up at the rear of a sedan, both of them leaning their full weight into it, while Beth sat behind the wheel, steering it along the path they had mapped out. The car rolled in small, grudging increments across the uneven asphalt, the unpowered steering making every correction a workout. When it finally rolled into place behind the row of vehicles already lined up along the right side of the supercenter's entrance, all 3 of them stopped and caught their breath. The design they were building was simple but deliberate. 2 lines of vehicles, one extending from each side of the front doors, running 5 cars deep before the ends curved inward to close off the space into a rough box. A makeshift arena, open at the far end for now, with the store's entrance serving as the only other way in or out. It took the 6 of them another 20 minutes after the last window was broken to push everything into its final position, the work made slower by the need for precision. A gap in the wrong place would undermine the whole thing. When the last car bumped into place, Magnus walked the full perimeter. He moved without hurrying, checking each junction between vehicles, testing a couple of the tighter fits with his hand to make sure nothing would roll. He came back around to where the 3 civilians were standing, all of them watching him with the particular expression of people who had been working hard in the heat and were now waiting to find out what exactly they had been working toward. They were exhausted, that much was clear. Beth had a streak of grime across one cheek, and her hair had come mostly free of whatever she had tied it with. Keith had stripped down to his undershirt at some point during the pushing. John was bent slightly at the waist, with his hands on his knees, catching his breath. But all 3 of them were looking at Magnus with alert eyes, waiting. "We greatly appreciate your help," Magnus said. "And now, if you would like to take your seats, the show is about to begin." Beth straightened up. "Show? What are you talking about, Magnus?" "The gladiator show," Magnus said. "We must dispatch the creatures inside that store, and you will be witnesses. This is Vegas, so not only is betting allowed, it is encouraged." Beth stared at him. "Betting? What are we betting on? And what are we betting with, for that matter? Because I don't think money has all that much value anymore." "The bet is on which one of us dispatches the most," Cade said. "The bet is for whatever you would like," Aldrich said. "However, given the realities of our new world, might I suggest something along the lines of first pick of the snack cakes once we clear this building out?" Beth opened her mouth, closed it, and stood there for a moment with the expression of someone trying to find a foothold in a conversation that had gotten away from them entirely. She looked at Aldrich, then at Magnus, then back at the arena they had all just spent the better part of an hour building together. John stood up straight from where he had been catching his breath. Something in his face had shifted, the exhaustion still there, but something else overtaking it, the look of a man deciding to simply go along with the situation on the grounds that nothing about the last few months had made any more sense than this. "Give me the big guy with the hammer," John said, with more confidence than the situation perhaps warranted. "And I want those chocolate-covered peanut butter wafers." Magnus turned to him with a broad smile, raising the warhammer and leveling it at the man in a salute. "By my hammer, those wafers shall be yours, sir," Magnus said. "Just remember, they are my favorite as well." "I will happily share my bounty," John said, matching his tone entirely, as if the 2 of them had been doing this for years. Beth looked at the 2 of them, then at Keith, who shrugged in a way that communicated he had reached the same conclusion as John and wasn't going to fight it. She pressed her fingers to her forehead. "Jesus Christ," she said. "I'm pretty sure I died in that restaurant and I'm in some surreal hell." Keith put his hand on her shoulder. It was a gentle gesture, the kind that said nothing useful but meant something anyway. Beth looked at his hand on her shoulder, then at the arena in the parking lot, then at the three gladiators standing in front of a Las Vegas supercenter in full armor, waiting to put on a show for an audience of 3 starving survivors. Something in her seemed to simply give way, and she broke out laughing. It started quietly and built on itself, and by the time it leveled off, she was shaking her head with a wide, helpless grin. "All right, fine," she said. "Let's watch a gladiator show." The 3 gladiators let out a single unified war cry, the sound of it rolling out across the empty parking lot and into the surrounding streets. Then they turned and moved to the arena, vaulting over the hoods and trunks of the assembled vehicles and landing inside the perimeter. Beth, Keith, and John climbed up onto the roof of the nearest car at the edge of the formation, settling in as close to a proper audience as the situation was going to allow. Aldrich and Cade spread out inside the arena, finding their positions on either side. Magnus walked to the front doors of the supercenter. The creatures behind the glass had been reacting to the noise and movement outside for the better part of an hour, pressing forward against the doors in increasing numbers. The sliding panels were still holding, kept in place by a simple mechanical lock on the inside track, but the weight being applied to them from within had the frames flexing in a way that suggested they weren't going to hold forever regardless. Magnus could see the lock clearly through the glass. He glanced back at the arena, making eye contact with Aldrich and Cade, who both gave him a nod. He brought the warhammer back and swung it at the locking mechanism. The impact was clean and direct, the blow driving through the external housing and into the internal components, and for a moment after the strike, he could hear the small metal pieces rattling loose inside the doorframe. Magnus stepped back from the doors and drew a long breath, then let out a deep, carrying shout aimed at the glass. An invitation. Inside, the massive creatures surged harder against the doors, the combined weight pressing into the already damaged locking point. The left door gave first. It buckled outward at the bottom and then collapsed entirely, the panel crashing flat onto the concrete, and the creatures nearest the front came spilling out across it. One of them caught the right door as it followed, the second panel coming down and pinning the ghoul beneath it. The rest moved around the obstruction without noticing it. Magnus retreated at an unhurried pace, drawing the stream of ghouls behind him as he rejoined the others in the middle of the arena. Aldrich moved to the left side. Cade moved to the right. Magnus planted himself in the center. The creatures filed out of the store and into the arena in a disorganized flow, each one locking onto the nearest source of movement and shuffling toward it. Cade pulled a portion of them his direction with a sharp whistle, the sound cutting through the ambient noise and drawing heads to the right. Aldrich dropped into a low growl that pulled several more to the left. Magnus stood still in the center, the only sound coming from him, the quiet rhythmic ring of his hammer tapping the asphalt at his feet. When the first wave reached Cade, he went to work. He took the lead creature on his shield, driving the metal face of it into the ghoul's chest and slamming it backward into the one behind it. The collision knocked both of them off balance, and before either could recover, Cade's blade had already found the front one through its open mouth. He was past it before it finished falling, the shield already up and moving toward the next. Aldrich didn't wait for the creatures to reach him. He went forward to meet them, sword sweeping in a wide horizontal arc that caught the first ghoul across the neck, with enough force to separate the head cleanly from the body. It dropped. He was already moving, dropping low in the same motion, driving the edge of his shield into the legs of the next creature and taking them out from under it. As the ghoul hit the ground, he drove his sword forward into its eye socket, then spun and brought the upper edge of the shield down hard across the back of another fallen ghoul's skull. In the center, Magnus let them come to him. The first creature that got within range received the warhammer directly to the top of the skull, the blow driving it straight down. He didn't stop there. He turned in place with his arm extended, the head of the hammer sweeping in a wide arc at chest height, catching 3 creatures in a row and sending them sprawling to the asphalt. He moved among them before they could recover, the hammer rising and falling in quick, precise strokes. working his way across the downed ghouls with the calm efficiency of a man doing a job he knew well. On the roof of the car, Beth, Keith, and John had gone quiet. They sat with their eyes tracking the 3 gladiators across the arena, following each engagement as it unfolded, too absorbed to do much more than watch. The creatures came out of the store and went down in the arena in a continuous cycle, the numbers inside the building visibly thinning with each passing minute. As the last of the main wave was dealt with and the stream from the store slowed to a trickle, the 3 gladiators found each other's positions across the arena, and something in their manner shifted. The efficiency gave way to something more playful, the way it does when the serious part of the work is mostly done, and there's room to enjoy what remains. Aldrich spotted an approaching ghoul and broke into a sprint, angling toward it, not to engage it directly, but to get past it. He deflected its outstretched arms with the flat of his shield as he ran by, getting around and behind the creature in one smooth movement. He spun and planted his feet, then drove forward with the shield against the ghoul's back, propelling it across the arena toward Cade, who hadn't moved. Cade stood with his sword extended at arm's length, motionless, the blade level. The creature walked into it at speed. On the roof, the 3 civilians burst into applause. Keith whistled. John shouted something that got lost in the noise. Even Beth was on her feet, clapping with the rest of them, her earlier skepticism fully surrendered to the spectacle. The last few creatures came out of the store 1 and 2 at a time, and the gladiators handled them with a degree of showmanship that seemed more for their own amusement than anything else. When the final ghoul went down, the arena fell quiet. Magnus, Aldrich, and Cade turned to face the 3 people standing on the roof of the car. They bowed together, a deep and formal bow, the kind that belonged in a different world entirely. Beth, Keith, and John gave them a standing ovation. Magnus straightened up and gestured toward the open doors of the supercenter. Thank you, he said. But please join us. We are going to go inspect our bounty, allow the betting victor to claim his wafer prize, and then we must be on our way. There is still a lot of work to be done in the city. Chapter 7. The front doors of the casino swung open, and 3 men stepped out into the open air for the first time in what felt like a long while. The strip stretched out in both directions, the famous boulevard reduced to something unrecognizable. Bodies covered the sidewalk and spilled out into the road, dozens of them, piled in the heaviest concentrations near the casino entrances, where the civilian fighters had made their stands behind hastily assembled barricades. The creatures had come at those positions in waves over the previous days, drawn by the noise and movement, and the defenders had held. What remained of that work lay scattered across the pavement in various states of decay. A few days old now, baking in the desert sun. Kyle, Damon, and Hiroshi picked their way through carefully, weaving between the bodies until they reached the clear lane in the middle of the road. They stopped there and looked up. The sky was wide and pale blue above the canyon of casino towers, and after the recycled air and fluorescent lighting of the interior, even the heat felt like something worth standing in for a moment. It is so nice to be out in the open again, Damon said. In theory, yes, Kyle said. It will be a lot better once we get rid of the smell. He gestured back at the bodies on the road. Damon followed the gesture and nodded slowly. Any idea what we're going to do with them? Damon asked. I've heard rumors of getting garbage trucks and loading them up, Kyle said. And taking them where? Kyle shrugged. Dump them in the desert? Maybe put them in one of those off-strip casinos. Both of them let out a short laugh at that. I'm not sure the desert oasis would be all that different, Damon said. Especially when they'd host those retirement groups, Kyle said. They were still chuckling when Kyle's radio crackled. Kyle, do you copy? The voice on the other end was Rob's, slightly breathless but steady. Kyle pulled the radio from his belt. I got you, Rob. What's up? We've breached the shopping center. Hang tight, we're on the way, Kyle said. He clipped the radio back and motioned for Damon and Hiroshi to follow, the 3 of them setting off down the center of the road at a steady pace. The strip had a different quality on foot than it ever had before. The scale of it was the same. The building still enormous, the signage still massive, but the absence of the crowd that had always filled it made the boulevard feel both larger and emptier than it had any right to. It's crazy how many shopping areas are down here on the strip, Damon said, looking at the storefronts and retail corridors that fed off the main road in every direction. On the plus side, it's good to know we'll never run out of Las Vegas t-shirts and shot glasses, Kyle said. Damon grinned. Small mercies. They walked for a couple of blocks, the shopping center coming into view ahead of them. Rob was standing out front with a group of a dozen civilians flanking him on either side. All of them were carrying the makeshift plastic shields, the same design that had become standard issue for the clearing teams over the past weeks. The melee weapons varied: bats, lengths of pipe, a couple of heavy wrench handles, one man with what appeared to be a modified closet rod with a bolt driven through the end of it. They stood in loose formation, focused and waiting. "Rob, how are we looking?" Kyle asked as he closed the last of the distance. Rob reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small digital camera. He powered it on, pulled up an image, and held it out for Kyle to look at. "I cracked the door and snapped a few shots, just to see what we were dealing with," Rob said. Kyle took the camera and studied the image on the small screen. The photo showed the interior of the shopping mall, a wide corridor with storefronts running down either side. The space was open and the lighting was dim, fed by the skylights running along the ceiling. There were ghouls visible, a few dozen of them, but none of them were near the entrance. The closest cluster appeared to be 40 yards or more down the corridor, gathered around the storefronts on the far end. Kyle handed the camera back. "Looks like it's safe to breach." He turned to face the shield bearers. All of them were looking at him with the quiet attention of people who had been doing this long enough to take it seriously. "All right," Kyle said. "It's just another day at the office in there. Work as a team, move slowly and deliberately, and we'll get through it in no time." He paused, letting his eyes move across the group before he continued. "I know the work is boring, and that our enemy doesn't seem like they're much of a real threat, but they are. One mistake, and it's all over. So, take your time, watch each other's backs, and give those things a double tap to make sure they're down for good." He held the pause, and every one of them gave back a nod. A beat later, without any signal being given, they all tapped their melee weapons against their shields. The sound rang out across the front of the shopping center. "All right, Rob," Kyle said. "Open it up." Rob stepped to the door and pulled it wide. The shield bearers flowed through the opening in a tight cluster, fanning out once they were inside. Kyle, Damon, Hiroshi, and Rob followed last, letting the strike team get ahead and take their positions. Inside the mall, 6 of the shield bearers moved up the corridor at a jog, covering the distance quickly and taking a knee about 10 yards short of the nearest group of creatures. They planted their shields in front of them, shoulders pressed into the plastic, forming a low, rigid line across the corridor. The rest of the team spread out behind them, raising their weapons. Together, they yelled. The sound filled the corridor and bounced off the tile floors and high ceiling, and the creatures at the far end responded to it immediately. The ones nearest turned first, the sound pulling their attention with the same instinctive certainty it always did, and the rest followed, the whole cluster orienting toward the noise and beginning to shamble forward. The excited moan that rose from them as they moved built on itself as they drew closer, getting louder with each step. They reached the shield line and pressed against it, and the line held. The civilians behind it went to work, reaching over and around the shields with their weapons, stabbing and swinging with controlled, efficient strikes. The ghouls had nowhere to go, pinned against the rigid plastic with no way to push through it, and one by one they went down under the steady work of the team behind the line. Kyle watched it from further back, with his arms loose at his sides. The operation had the look of something that had been practiced, which, in a sense, it had. Every team had been through enough of these clearings now that the mechanics were becoming second nature, the roles understood, without needing to be called out. It didn't take long. The last of the cluster went down, and the team lead looked back down the corridor toward Kyle. "Move up and eliminate anything that doesn't look friendly," Kyle said. The team smacked their shields and turned, moving deeper into the mall in a compact formation, working toward the far end of the building. Kyle and the others walked forward to the storefront the creatures had been clustered around. It was a gift shop, the kind built entirely around the concept of Las Vegas as a destination. The display windows were full of the standard inventory: t-shirts stacked on folding tables, racks of shot glasses and novelty mugs, snow globes and keychains and miniature replicas of the strip's famous signs. Most of it was exactly as it had been left, untouched and neatly arranged. the store's electricity out, but enough light coming through the windows and skylights to make everything visible. The others gave it a passing glance and kept moving. Hiroshi stopped. He stood in front of the display window and looked intently at something inside. The others had moved past him by the time any of them noticed, and it was the quality of his attention that brought Kyle back. The Japanese man wasn't looking at the merchandise. His eyes were fixed on the rack near the register, and his expression had the particular focus of someone reading a scene rather than looking at it. "What do you have, Hiroshi?" Kyle asked. Hiroshi didn't understand the words, but understood the question behind them. He pointed toward the shelving unit near the register. Kyle looked where he was pointing. The snack rack was empty. Every slot on it was bare, the small cardboard dividers that separated the products still in place, but nothing behind them. No candy, no chips, no packages of any kind. The rest of the store was fully stocked, undisturbed, every item in its place. But the rack near the register had been cleaned out entirely. "I'm not sure exactly what I'm looking at," Kyle said, "but it feels off." He nodded at Rob, who was already moving toward the pull-down security gate that blocked the entrance. Rob pulled a small toolkit from his jacket and crouched in front of the locking mechanism, working it with a quiet efficiency. It took less than a minute before the lock released with a solid thunk of metal. Kyle grabbed the bottom of the gate and pulled it up, the metal rattling on its track as it rose. He drew his knife and moved inside, the others following close behind. The store was quiet, the shelves and racks undisturbed around him, nothing moving. Kyle moved carefully toward the back of the shop, checking each row as he passed. The rest of the team did the same, covering the angles without being told. At the far end of the store, a curtain hung across a narrow doorway, which divided the retail floor from the back room. Kyle approached it, took a breath, and pulled it aside. His hand went to the light switch on the wall without thinking and found it, flicking it upward. The single overhead bulb in the small room came on. There was a figure on the floor. Kyle's body had tensed before he finished processing what he was seeing. He held the position for a moment, reading the stillness of the person in front of him. No movement, no rise and fall of the chest. He stepped closer and crouched down. It was a young man. He had been slight to begin with, but whatever that had been was gone now, the muscle wasted away from a long period without enough to eat. His face was hollowed, his arms thin against the floor. He lay on his side, a jacket folded under his head as a makeshift pillow. Kyle sheathed the knife and gently placed 2 fingers against the man's neck. Nothing. The skin was cold. The body had the rigid quality of someone who had been gone for days. He sat back on his heels. "Jesus Christ," Damon said quietly. "That's a rough way to go." He moved his eyes to the floor near the young man's body. A small collection of empty packaging was scattered nearby, the cellophane wrappers and foil bags of the snacks from the rack out front, all of them opened and empty. Damon looked at them for a long moment. "Locked in here for weeks, months, with no food," Damon said. "Just starving to death. I can't imagine." "Should I call the doc?" Rob asked. Kyle gently rolled the young man onto his back, already knowing the answer before he checked again. He shook his head. "There's no point," Kyle said. "He's been gone for a while." The 4 of them stood there in the small back room without speaking. The sound from the mall outside was distant. The strike team working further down the corridor. The occasional noise of the clearing in progress filtering through the curtain. In the room itself, there was nothing but the hum of the overhead bulb. Then the footsteps came. They were fast, too fast for a ghoul, the rapid slap of someone running hard on tile. All 4 of them turned toward the curtain as the sound grew louder, closing the distance down the corridor toward the gift shop. Hiroshi's hand moved to his spear, the posture shifting, reading the speed as something dangerous. The curtain was pushed aside, and a man from the strike team appeared in the doorway, breathing hard, his shield still strapped to his arm. "We're getting overwhelmed," he said. "We need help." Chapter 8. The shield bearer led the way back down the corridor at a hard pace, his plastic shield bouncing against his forearm as he moved. Kyle, Damon, Rob, and Hiroshi followed close behind, their footsteps joining the noise that was already building ahead of them. The moaning was what hit Kyle first, before he could even see what they were running toward. Not the low, scattered sound of a handful of creatures working a door. This was a chorus, layered and continuous, the kind that built in the chest before it ever reached the ears. They came around the corner, and Kyle pulled up just long enough to read the situation. The corridor ahead was full. The civilian strike team had abandoned the offensive entirely and collapsed into a single defensive wall, every shield bearer pressed shoulder to shoulder across the width of the hallway, their backs straight and their weight forward, the plastic panels locked together into a continuous barrier. Behind the line, only one fighter was still working, reaching past the shields to strike down whatever came within range. The rest of the team was pouring everything they had into simply holding the position. On the other side of the wall, the horde pressed forward in a mass. The creatures had come from deeper in the mall, drawn by the noise of the earlier clearing, and they had arrived in numbers that nobody had anticipated based on Rob's photographs. The weight against the shield wall was constant, the line bending inward slightly at the center from the sustained pressure, the civilians' boots scraping against the tile as they fought to hold their ground. Kyle scanned the situation quickly, realizing that retreat wasn't an option given their numbers. If the line broke and the team turned to run, they ran the risk of legs getting tangled, which would be a death sentence. They needed to thin the numbers, and they needed to do it from a position the creatures hadn't already locked onto. His eyes moved past the line, past the horde, down the corridor. 50 yards back, the hallway opened up into a food court. The tables and chairs of half a dozen closed restaurant stalls arranged around a wide central seating area. "Damon, Rob, get up there and start thinning them," Kyle said. Both men were already moving. Rob grabbed the shield bearer who had come to find them, pulling him along by the arm as they ran toward the line. They pushed into the gaps on either side of the wall, adding their weight and their weapons to the effort, both of them immediately going to work on the creatures pressing against the shields in front of them. Kyle pulled the radio from his belt and clicked it on. "I need reinforcements to the new shopping mall now." He didn't wait for a confirmation before clipping it back to his vest. Even with 2 more fighters at the line, the wall was visibly straining. The sheer volume of creatures on the other side hadn't diminished, and the civilians holding the shields were burning through their energy reserves fast. Kyle needed to pull some of the horde away from the line before the people holding it ran out of strength to keep it together. He turned to Hiroshi and grabbed his arm, getting the man's attention, then pointed down the hallway toward the food court. Hiroshi followed the gesture and nodded once. They ran. The food court was larger up close than it had looked from down the hall, the central seating area ringed by the closed stalls of what had once been a collection of fast food counters and sandwich shops. The chairs were still pushed in around the tables, everything exactly as it had been left on the day the mall went quiet. Kyle grabbed the nearest table and flipped it onto its side, the metal legs pointing outward. Hiroshi was already doing the same with the one beside it, and the 2 of them worked fast, dragging and flipping tables in a line parallel to the mob, building a low barricade that wouldn't stop anything, but would at least slow it down and force the creatures into a narrower approach. When they had enough in place, Kyle straightened up, put 2 fingers in his mouth, and whistled as loud as he could manage. The sound cut sharp and high over the moaning from the horde. He followed it immediately by dropping to one knee and bringing his baseball bat down against the tile floor in a fast, hard rhythm, the impacts cracking out across the food court. It was hard to compete with the noise of the horde for the attention of any individual creature, but it was enough. Kyle watched down the corridor and saw heads turning away from the shield wall, the instinct that drove the ghouls towards sound and movement, pulling some of them out of the mass and redirecting them down the hall toward the food court. Not as many as he would have liked, but enough to work with. "I'd like more," Kyle said, mostly to himself, "but that's going to have to do." The 2 of them kept making noise, Kyle alternating between the whistle and the bat against the floor, Hiroshi adding his voice to the effort. The detached portion of the horde shambled toward the food court in an uneven line, the fastest ones pulling ahead of the slower stragglers behind them. Kyle counted roughly 3 dozen as they came into the open space. Hiroshi stepped up to the line of overturned tables and readied his spear. He didn't wait for the creatures to reach the barrier. His reach with the weapon was enough to engage them before they got there, the spear finding eye sockets cleanly and efficiently, dropping ghoul after ghoul before it could even get its hands on the table. He worked methodically from left to right, resetting after each strike, the tip of the spear coming back level and ready for the next one. Kyle let Hiroshi work the front and moved to the side, positioning himself where the creatures that pushed past or around the end of the table line would funnel toward him. When the first one came around the edge, he swung the bat in a level arc and put it down. The next one came from the other side, pushing through a gap between two of the tables, and he reversed the swing and caught it on the follow-through. The creatures pressed against the tables, their weight beginning to drag the makeshift barricade across the tile, the metal legs scraping and grinding against the floor. Kyle and Hiroshi backed up with it, keeping their footing, adjusting their positions as the line shifted. The ghouls that spilled around the ends of the tables got their attention for a few seconds before being put down and didn't slow their focus. Kyle glanced over his shoulder. The wall behind him was closer than it had been a minute ago. Then he heard it. A battle cry from the far end of the mall towards the entrance, multiple voices, getting louder fast. Two teams came around the corner at a run, civilians in shield and weapon formation, moving quickly towards the fight. The first team split off toward the main line at the shield wall, pushing in along the flanks and adding fighters to the striking positions behind it, the fresh energy of the new arrivals immediately visible in how the line steadied. The second team came straight toward the food court, three of the shield bearers out front in a tight wedge formation. The wedge hit the flank of the creature mob at full speed. The three shields drove forward together, plowing into the mass of ghouls and knocking a half dozen of them off their feet in a single push. The creatures that went down under the impact were dealt with quickly by the fighters coming in behind the shields. The ones still standing found themselves caught between the incoming team on one side and Kyle and Hiroshi on the other. The battle didn't let up cleanly. It ground forward in increments, the numbers on the creature side dropping steadily while the humans traded ground and repositioned. The noise in the food court, a sustained mix of impacts and movement, and the constant undercurrent of moaning. Kyle kept moving, kept striking, kept an eye on Hiroshi's position and his own, calling out when a gap appeared and needed to be covered. The tide turned slowly, and then all at once. The horde's numbers crossing a threshold where the pressure dropped, and the remaining creatures became individual problems rather than a collective wall. The last few were handled quickly, isolated and put down without ceremony. Then the mall fell quiet. The silence after a fight like that always felt louder than it should. Kyle stood in the middle of the food court, breathing hard, and let the sound of nothing settle for a moment. Around him, the civilians were doing the same, hands on knees, weapons resting, heads down. Kyle straightened up and began walking through the space, moving among the people who had held the line. "Is there anybody injured?" he called out. "Is anybody bitten?" He moved from group to group, looking each person in the face and waiting for their response. He got nods, shaken heads, a few raised hands that turned out to be minor cuts from the shield straps digging into their arms. He kept moving, kept checking, working through the full group methodically before he was satisfied. Nobody had been bitten. Not one. The relief that came with that never got smaller, no matter how many times it happened. He felt it move through him and let it. And then he let it become the thing that put the smile on his face as he turned to face the group. "Okay," Kyle said, loudly enough that the entire team could hear him. "We're taking extra precautions while we clear this place. I want the teams to double in size and check in with Rob at regular intervals." He paused, letting the image of the young man in the back room of the gift shop come back to him for a moment, then push back out. "We're going to need a store-by-store clearing," he continued. "We've already found someone who didn't make it. More than likely there are more of them in here. On the off chance you find someone still alive, yell out for the doc. I'm going to pull a call into them now and get them over here." He looked around at the faces in front of him. "All right," he said. "Let's get moving. There's still a lot of places we need to clear out." The teams began to organize themselves, the noise of the group shifting from rest to purpose. Kyle was reaching for his radio to call for the medic when it crackled first. "Kyle, Captain Foster is trying to reach you on Channel 6, a voice said. "Copy that," Kyle said. He switched frequencies and clicked the radio on. "Captain Foster, do you copy?" "I got you, Kyle," Foster said. "Just checking in." "We're making good progress down here," Kyle said, clearing out another shopping center on the strip. "Any survivors?" Kyle let out a slow breath. "Not yet. We found a few people who managed to lock themselves away, but we couldn't get to them in time." Foster took a moment before responding. "I'm sorry to hear that." "What about the other teams out there?" Kyle asked. "It's been hit or miss, but we have managed to find some." That's good at least. I wasn't exactly optimistic when we started out today, Foster said. But with each group I talk to, I'm feeling better about things. I'm sorry that we haven't been able to add to your optimism, Kyle said. I was on the strip the night all of this kicked off, Foster said. I'm honestly surprised anybody survived that first night, you included. Kyle let out a short laugh. Across the food court, Damon was walking toward him, catching his eye and motioning for him to come over. Kyle held up a finger and spoke into the radio. Hang on just a second, Captain. He lowered the radio and looked at Damon. What is it, man? We just found 2 survivors in a restaurant, Damon said. They're in rough shape, but I think they're going to be okay. Kyle let that land for a moment, then lifted the radio back up. Captain? I'm here, Foster said. Damon just came over to tell me that we have 2 survivors. That's excellent news, Kyle, Foster said. Keep me posted. Will do, Captain. The line went quiet and Kyle clipped the radio back to his vest. He looked at Damon. I think the teams have this mall pretty well handled, Damon said. Do you want me to grab Hiroshi so we can go scout out the next one? Kyle nodded, already scanning the area and finding Hiroshi near the far end, the Japanese man standing at ease with his spear, watching the teams begin to move out. Kyle caught his eye and got a nod back. I'm game, Kyle said. Let's go see who else we can save. The end.